Jerome Caldwell was 44 years old, and for 4 years he believed he was a widower. He sold the house where they built their life, worked double shifts on a factory floor until his hands were permanently calloused, and carried the specific hollowness of a man who had simply learned to function inside grief. He planned the funeral. He filed the insurance claim. He visited the grave every October like clockwork. He did every single thing a man is supposed to do when the worst thing happens, because he believed it had. Then he boarded a birthday cruise he almost didn't take, ordered his first rum punch in 4 years, and looked up from his breakfast table. She was standing 30 feet away, alive, tanned, laughing, that exact laugh he had buried, leaning into another man like she had not a single thing to answer for. The crescent scar on her left forearm caught the Caribbean sunlight and confirmed what his eyes were already telling him. Jerome set his fork down slowly. He did not stand. He did not make a scene. He picked up his phone and took a photograph. What Jerome Caldwell did next would unravel everything she thought she had permanently escaped. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The drink was cold in his hand. Jerome Caldwell had been holding it for 11 minutes. He knew because he'd checked his watch when the server brought it over, same way he checked the clock whenever a new shift started at the plant. Habit. The ice was shrinking. The rum punch was getting warm at the edges. He still hadn't taken a sip. The ocean stretched out in every direction like something that didn't know what problems were. The Empress of the Atlantic cut through the water smooth and steady, and the Lido deck hummed with the low noise of people who had decided, for 1 week, that their lives were good. Somewhere behind him, a kid was laughing too loud. A steel drum version of an old R&B song drifted up from a deck below. The sun pressed down on everything. Warm, heavy, honest. Jerome sat in all of it, and felt mostly like a man waiting for a shift to start. He set the drink on the small table beside him and looked at his hands. The calluses along his right palm had been there so long he'd stopped noticing them. Built up from the plant floor, from years before the promotion, from pulling cable and running line before he was the man who managed the men who pulled cable and ran line. Foreman now. He'd worked double shifts for 18 months to get there. People at the plant thought he was ambitious. He was not. He was just a man who needed somewhere to be. He reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out the paperback. The Long Goodbye by Raymond Chandler. He'd been on page 211 for 6 weeks. He opened it, read the same paragraph he'd read 3 times the night before, and put it back in his pocket. Today, he was 44 years old. His daughter Camille had called him that morning before the ship left Miami. She was 17, sharp in the particular way of someone who learned early that the world doesn't stop for you, so you'd better learn to move with it. She had booked this trip herself, found the deal online, argued him into it over dinner on 3 separate occasions, and eventually just bought it and handed him the confirmation email with a look that said the conversation was finished. "You haven't been anywhere, Dad," she'd told him. "Not in 4 years. You need to go somewhere." He hadn't argued after that. He knew she was right. He also knew she was doing what she'd been doing since she was old enough to understand what was missing, trying to fill in the space that the accident had left. 4 years ago, he let that sit the way he always let it sit, careful and deliberate, the way you handle something fragile, even after you know you've already survived dropping it. 4 years ago, Adrienne was driving back from her sister's place in Dayton. A semi ran a red light on State Route 35. The car went into the river. They found it 2 days later. They found her, a body, 2 weeks after that, badly decomposed from the water. The identification came back through dental records. The funeral director was patient with Jerome when he couldn't decide between 2 caskets and stood there in that showroom for 20 minutes without speaking. He'd handled every piece of it. The funeral arrangements, made alone. The phone calls, made alone. The life insurance forms, The house? Their house on Maple Run, the one with the sunroom Adrian had painted herself, butter yellow. He couldn't stay in it, so he sold it, took the loss, moved him and Camille into a two-bedroom apartment on the east side. He sat Camille down, 7 years old, small enough that her feet didn't touch the floor when she sat on the kitchen chair, and explained to her in the clearest, most careful words he knew where Mommy had gone and why she wasn't coming back. He still didn't know if he'd done that right. He'd worked. He'd shown up. He'd learned every name on his floor before he made foreman, not to impress anyone, but because men work harder for someone who knows their name. And Jerome Caldwell had never once in his life done anything half-measure. When the server had brought his drink an hour ago, Jerome had thanked her and used the name off her badge, Lucia. She'd blinked a little, the way people do when a stranger treats them like a person instead of furniture. He had been functional for 4 years. He knew that. What he also knew, in the quiet, private place where he kept things that were too honest for company, was that functional wasn't the same as okay. He'd been going through the motions of a life. Work, home, Camille, sleep, repeat. He had not been anywhere, done anything, or wanted much of anything for himself in a long time. He picked up the rum punch. It was still cold enough, sweet and sharp. The smell of it, the ocean underneath it, the weight of the sun on his forearms. Something in him went slightly loose, like a knot easing off. He looked at the horizon, a clean, flat line where the blue of the sky met the blue of the water. Maybe Camille was right, he thought. Maybe this is good. The breakfast buffet ran along the entire port side of Deck 11, and it was the kind of spread that made you feel like someone had set out to solve abundance as a problem. Eggs 6 ways, pastries stacked in warm pyramids, fruit cut into shapes that had no reason to be shapes. Jerome moved through it with a plate he wasn't very committed to, a little bit of everything, nothing he was particularly hungry for, and found a table near the window where the ocean was bright and flat in the morning light. He ate slowly and read the news on his phone. The plant had texted twice. He ignored both. He was off the clock. That was the deal. The buffet hummed around him. Families negotiating over orange juice. A couple who hadn't spoken since sitting down. A man in a bucket hat photographing his waffles. Jerome watched all of it the way he watched the floor at work. Peripheral, automatic, not really looking at anything. He was reading an article he wasn't retaining when he heard the laugh. He didn't look up immediately. That was the strange thing. The thing he'd think about later. His body heard it before his brain did. Some old, deep part of him registered it the way you register your own name. Not a thought, just a turning, a pull. The laugh came again. He looked up. She was standing at the omelet station, 30, maybe 35 feet away. Jerome's brain did what brains do when they encounter the impossible. It offered him alternatives, quick and generous. It's not her. Someone who sounds like her. You're tired. You've been alone a long time, and your mind is... He went still, and he looked. Same jaw. Sharp at the angles, softer underneath. The set of her shoulders. The way she stood with her weight slightly on her left foot. She was wearing a sundress the color of sea glass, and a wide-brimmed hat that she'd pushed back so it sat loose around her face. She looked rested. She looked healthy. She looked, in fact, better than he had ever seen her look, which was a detail that landed somewhere behind his sternum and didn't move. She reached up and touched the back of her neck. Jerome's fork lowered itself to his plate. He had watched her do that exact thing 10,000 times, whenever she was looking at a menu, whenever she was deciding whether to answer the phone, whenever she was in a conversation she was calculating her way through. Same motion, same 2 fingers pressing at the base of her hairline. He needed one more thing, and he knew exactly what to look for. He found it. Her left forearm. She'd turned slightly to take a plate from the buffet attendant, and the sundress had short sleeves, and right there, pale against the inside of her forearm, was a small crescent-shaped scar. She'd caught herself on the oven rack in the kitchen of the Maple Run house in 2014. He'd been the one to clean it. He'd been the one to keep changing the bandage for a week. He knew that scar the way he knew the sound of the apartment door catching on its frame. She was alive. She was standing at a breakfast buffet on a cruise ship in the Caribbean. She was laughing. The man beside her was tall, silver at the temples, dressed with the easy confidence of someone who had never had to check a price tag in his life. He had a wide, unhurried smile, and a hand resting at the small of her back, like it had been there for years. She leaned into it, small and natural, the way you lean into something you've gotten used to, the way you lean into someone you trust. Jerome sat with this for approximately 30 seconds. Then he picked up his phone. He was calm. He registered the calm the way you register weather. It was simply the condition he was operating in. His hand did not shake. He opened the camera. He took 2 photos, making sure to get her face clearly, the hat pushed back enough to confirm what he already knew. Then he pressed the video button and moved the phone slowly, deliberately, like a man taking in the view. Her face, her neck, the omelet station, back across, down to the forearm, the scar in the morning light, and then to the man beside her, full frame, face forward. Then he locked his phone, stood up, and left his plate where it was. He walked back to his cabin at a completely ordinary pace. He sat on the edge of the bed and put the phone face down on the comforter beside him. The cabin was cool and dim and very quiet. The ship rocked almost imperceptibly. Outside the small round window, the ocean was still doing what it always did, moving without caring about anything at all. Jerome put his hands on his knees. 11 minutes passed. He knew because he checked his watch at the beginning and at the end. In those 11 minutes, a specific kind of understanding arrived. Not like a wave, nothing that dramatic, but the way water fills the low places in a floor. Slow, complete, without asking permission. She had not died. She had left. Not the way people leave, not with suitcases, not with a conversation, not with papers signed and furniture divided, and the ugly human work of ending something. She had chosen to be dead. She had decided that dying was easier than talking to him. She had looked at their life, at their daughter, at 7-year-old Camille with her feet that didn't touch the floor when she sat in a kitchen chair, and she had chosen to simply not exist anymore rather than walk out the front door like a person. The dental records. A body that was identified through dental records. Someone else's dental records. The insurance payout. $200,000 that had barely covered the debts and the sale loss on the house. That money had come because she was dead, and she was not dead. And Jerome had filed those forms himself in a funeral home office with a pen that kept running dry and a director who kept apologizing for the inconvenience. He thought about Camille's face at the funeral. He thought about the dress she wore, small and dark, standing at a graveside in October. He thought about the woman at the omelet station, laughing in the morning sun. He picked up his phone and dialed. It rang twice. "Jerome? You're supposed to be on a boat somewhere." "Pat." His voice was level, even. A foreman's voice. "I need you to do something for me, and I need you to not ask questions yet." Jerome moved to the small desk by the window and sat down. The cabin was 12 feet wide, maybe less. There was a desk, a chair, a lamp that cast a narrow yellow cone across the surface. Outside, the ocean moved. Jerome did not look at it. He opened his phone and pulled up the photos from the buffet. He looked at them with the same flat attention he gave to production reports, looking for what was actually there, not what he expected to find. Her face was clear. The scar was visible in the second photo, the morning light landing on her forearm at exactly the right angle. The video was steady. He had always had steady hands. He sent the photo of the man to Patrice with a single line: "Face, search this. Need a name." Then he sat back and waited. He did not spiral. He did not pace. He had spent 20 years on factory floors where the cost of panic was a shutdown. And that discipline had become so deep in him that he couldn't have accessed panic now if he'd tried. He simply sat in the chair and let his mind work the problem the way it always worked. Problems, backward, from the failure point. What broke? Why it broke? In what order? Patrice texted back in just under 2 hours. Victor Ossi, real estate developer, based in Scottsdale, Arizona. Public filings suggest he's worth a lot. I mean, a lot. More coming. Jerome read it twice, saved the name in a note on his phone, added Scottsdale, underlined it in his mind. Then he got dressed for the evening. The cocktail hour was held on the upper aft deck, and by 7 o'clock it was crowded and golden, the sun going down behind the ship in a long, slow burn. Jerome wore a plain dark shirt and took a position near the outer rail with a club soda, his back half turned to the crowd. A man alone with a drink, watching the water. Nobody looked at him twice. He found her in under 4 minutes. She was near the center of a loose group. 6 people, maybe 7. The kind of mix you accumulate on a cruise ship. Different cities, different tax brackets, held together for a week by proximity and open bars. Victor stood at the edge of the group, easy and self-contained, laughing at something someone said. She was beside him, working. That was the word that arrived in Jerome's mind, and stayed. She was working the room. Her hands moved when she talked. She tilted her head at exactly the right angle when someone else was speaking. The attentive tilt, the one that made whoever was talking feel like they were the only person on the deck. She touched a woman's arm, and the woman smiled like she'd been given something. She laughed, the practiced version of her laugh, the one Jerome had already catalogued from the buffet, and it was close enough that someone who didn't know her couldn't tell. But Jerome knew the real one. The real one broke slightly at the top, caught itself. This one didn't do that. This one was smooth all the way through. She had been practicing it. For years, probably. He watched her move to Victor's side and say something to him, just for him, private, in the middle of a crowd. Victor looked at her the way a man looks at something he can't believe is his. Jerome recognized the expression because he had worn it himself once, a long time ago. He didn't look away. He just noted it, filed it. Then he watched her approach the hostess station near the deck entrance, where a woman with a clipboard was managing dinner reservations. He wasn't close enough to hear every word, but he was close enough for the name. "Dana Mercer," she said. "Reservation for 2. We pushed it to 8:30. The hostess smiled and made a mark. Adrienne moved back to Victor. Jerome took a slow sip of his club soda and looked back out at the water. He was in the cabin by 8. He texted Patrice, "Dana Mercer, Scottsdale, Arizona. Find her." Patrice came back 40 minutes later, and the text was longer than her others. Driver's license, issued 3.5 years ago. SSN traces back to a real person. Dana Renee Mercer, born 1981, died Cincinnati, 2019. Jerome, she didn't just run. She built this. This was ready before she was ever gone. He read it. Then he set the phone face down on the desk. He opened the desk drawer. Inside was a notepad with the cruise line's logo and a ballpoint pen that he tested twice on the corner of the pad before using. He wrote for approximately 4 minutes. The list had 9 items, numbered, clean, nothing abbreviated. He printed rather than cursed. Old habit, easier to read under pressure. When he finished, he looked at it once. Start to finish. The way you review a work order before signing off. Then he picked up the phone and started making calls. The grief was gone. He noticed its absence, the way you notice when a sound you've stopped hearing finally stops completely. It had been there so long he'd stopped calling it by its name. What was there now was something else, something quiet, something that did not need to announce itself. He had the name, he had the face, he had the list. He got to work. Jerome was back at his desk by 7:15 Monday morning. Same coffee, same mug, same drive-in. He had stopped at the same gas station he stopped at every weekday, filled up, bought a bottle of water, nodded at the same cashier who never said much and didn't start now. He parked in the same spot, walked through the same side entrance. The plant smelled the way it always smelled, metal shavings and machine oil, and the faint sweetness of the industrial cleaner they used on the floor drains. He clocked in. He did his morning walk. He reviewed the overnight production log, initialed 2 maintenance requests, and asked Marcus on the line about his knee because Marcus had been favoring it for 2 weeks, and Jerome had been watching. Nothing changed. Nothing could. The only way this worked was if everything stayed exactly the same on the surface. He understood that the way he understood load tolerances, you change one variable quietly. You do not touch the others. You hold the structure steady while you work underneath it. Patrice found him during the 11 o'clock break. She came into his office, closed the door behind her, and sat down across from him without being asked. That was how they operated. No performance, no preamble. She put a manila folder on his desk. BMV contact came through, she said. Original accident report. I also got something else. He opened the folder. The accident report was 3 pages. He had seen versions of it before. After Adrienne died, the insurance company had shared a summary. But this was the full document, unredacted. He read it the way he read everything, top to bottom, once without stopping. On page 2, buried in the identification section, was the name of the dentist who submitted the dental records used to confirm the body. Dr. Raymond Alt. Practice address, Dayton, Ohio. Jerome looked up at Patrice. Keep reading, she said. The second document in the folder was a printout from the Ohio State Dental Board's public records. Dr. Raymond Alt. License suspended. The date was 8 months after the accident. The reason listed was a formal finding of record falsification related to fraudulent identity documentation submitted on behalf of multiple patients. Jerome put the paper down on the desk with the same care he gave to everything he handled. The PI firm confirmed it this morning, Patrice said. Alt had a pattern. He wasn't the only case. But one of them matched the timeline and the geography well enough that they flagged it. They're pulling more. Jerome nodded slowly. There's one more thing, Patrice said. Her voice had dropped slightly, not softer, just more careful. I went back and looked at Alt's patient records from the public disciplinary file. His suspension was triggered by a complaint filed 14 months before the accident, meaning he was already doing this before she disappeared. Jerome did the math without reaching for paper. He was good at math. If Alt was falsifying records 14 months before the complaint, and the complaint was filed 8 months after the accident, that put the start of his work, their work, somewhere around 18 months before the accident, maybe more. Camille had been 6 years old, 18 months before the accident. He thought about that for a moment. He let the thought sit where it landed without trying to move it anywhere. 6 years old, losing her first tooth. He remembered that. Camille at the kitchen table, running her tongue over the gap, laughing her surprised little laugh. He remembered Adrienne had taken a photo of it on her phone. He wondered now what else Adrienne had been doing on that phone. Jerome. Patrice's voice was level. She was watching him the way she always watched him when she needed to know if she should keep talking or wait. I'm here, he said. Okay. Has the PI confirmed the dentist's connection to the identity documentation specifically? To Dana Mercer? Not yet in writing. They said by Wednesday. Good. He closed the folder. Let me know when it comes. Patrice stood. She picked up her coffee cup, paused at the door. You eating? I'll eat. She looked at him for one more second, then left. Jerome sat alone in his office for a while after that. He did not move the folder. He did not open it again. He just sat with what he knew the way you sit, with a completed calculation. You have the number. You don't need to run it twice. The number was 18 months. The number was 6 years old. The number was a photograph of a gap-toothed little girl, whose mother was already building a door out. He had not told Camille anything. Not yet. There was still more to confirm, more to assemble. He needed the full structure in place before he moved, because he was only going to move once, and once was going to be enough. When he was ready, he pulled the folder across the desk and labeled it with a strip of masking tape and a black marker. He wrote one word on the tab: Alt. He slid it into his work bag beside the others. He finished his shift. He drove home. He made dinner. Nothing special. Pasta. Something easy. He washed the dishes. He looked at Camille's closed bedroom door and listened to the sound of her music through it. He went to bed at 10:15. He did not sleep well, but he did not stop moving forward. Jerome called Darnell on a Wednesday evening, just after 7. "Hey, old man," he said when Darnell picked up. He kept his voice easy, warm, the way it always was with Darnell, because for 4 years it always had been, because Jerome had made a point of that, of keeping the relationship intact, of not letting Camille lose her grandfather on top of everything else. He had thought he was being decent. "Jerome!" Darnell's voice was the same as always, low and slow, a little rough at the edges the way voices get when a man has hit 65 and spent 30 years on a mail route in Cleveland winters. "How you doing, son?" "I'm good. Real good, actually. Listen, I've been meaning to get up to see you. Camille's got her college applications almost finished, and I thought it might be nice to sit down, talk through some of it. Get your input. You know she listens to you." A small pause. "She does listen to me," Darnell said, and Jerome could hear the smile in it. "Saturday work? There's that diner on Euclid you like." "Saturday works just fine." The diner was old and warm and smelled like coffee that had been sitting on a burner since morning, which was the way Darnell liked it. He was already in the booth when Jerome arrived, wearing a green cardigan and reading glasses pushed up on his forehead. He stood to shake Jerome's hand, and they did the thing they always did. The handshake that pulled into a brief half-embrace. Two men who had shared grief and Sunday dinners and Camille's school plays. Jerome sat down. They talked. It was easy conversation, the kind that comes from years of practice. Darnell had opinions about Howard University and Morgan State. He thought Camille should stay closer to home, but knew better than to say it too directly. He asked about Jerome's work, and Jerome told him about the new equipment the plant had brought in, a retooling of the East Line that had been Jerome's project since spring. Darnell drank his coffee and listened and asked the right questions. 40 minutes in, their plates were mostly cleared. The server had refilled Darnell's cup twice. Outside, Euclid Avenue moved at its usual Saturday pace. Buses, a few pedestrians, the low gray light of a Cleveland autumn pressing against the diner windows. Jerome reached into his jacket pocket. He took out his phone, unlocked it, and set it face up on the table. He slid it across to Darnell without a word. On the screen was the photograph from the cruise ship. Adrienne at the omelet station, the wide hat, the sundress, the man beside her, her left forearm visible at the edge of the frame, the crescent scar showing white against her skin. Jerome watched Darnell's face. That was the thing. That was the whole thing. Right there. Jerome had been watching people his entire working life, reading the small signals that came before the big ones, the micro-hesitations that told you where the real problem was before the machine started making noise. He knew what surprise looked like. He knew the exact way a person's eyes moved when something hit them that they were not prepared for. Darnell's eyes did not move that way. They went still. They dropped to the photograph and stayed there. And what crossed his face was not shock. It was the careful, compressed expression of a man absorbing an impact he had been, somewhere underneath everything, waiting for. He knew. The knowledge sat in Jerome's chest, like something cooling. He had suspected it, had turned the possibility over during the drive up from Columbus, had made himself consider that he might be wrong, that Darnell might be innocent of this at least. He had wanted to be wrong. He was not wrong. Jerome took the phone back, set it in his pocket. Then he folded his hands on the table in front of him and asked the first question in the same voice he used to discuss line tolerances and production targets, steady, without any give in it at all. "Did you know before the accident?" Darnell opened his mouth, closed it, looked at the table. "Have you seen her since?" A sound came out of Darnell then. Not a word. Something smaller. And worse. Jerome waited 3 seconds. "Does Camille know she has a grandfather who chose Adrienne over her?" Darnell's face broke. That was the only word for it. It simply broke apart, the way things do when the structure holding them has been failing a long time and finally meets the one thing it cannot absorb. He pressed one hand over his mouth. His shoulders pulled in. The tears came, and they were real. Jerome could see that they were real, and it did not matter. Jerome looked at him for a moment. Then he reached into his wallet, counted out enough to cover both meals and a reasonable tip, and set the bills on the table beside his water glass. He stood up. He buttoned his coat. He walked out of the diner without looking back. His car was parked half a block down. He got in, closed the door, and sat. The street outside was quiet through the glass. A bus rolled past. A woman walked a dog. Ordinary Saturday morning, ordinary city, ordinary everything. Jerome sat still for 60 seconds. He did not count them out loud. He did not need to. Then he started the engine and drove home. Sunday dinner was their thing. It had been their thing since Camille was 8 years old, when Jerome decided that whatever else the week took from them, Sunday evenings belonged to the two of them. He cooked. She set the table. They ate together without the television on, without phones, just the sound of utensils and easy conversation, and the particular quiet of two people who were comfortable enough with each other that silence didn't need filling. Tonight, he made smothered chicken. Her favorite. She ate 2 helpings and talked about her chemistry teacher, about a group project she had been carrying mostly alone for 2 weeks, about the girl in her English class who had finally, apparently, gotten her act together. Jerome listened and laughed in the right places and passed her the bread without being asked. He let her have all of dinner. When the plates were cleared and Camille was reaching for her phone, Jerome said, "Leave that for a minute. I need to talk to you about something." The way he said it made her put the phone down. She knew his voice. She knew every variation of it. The work voice, the tired voice, the proud voice he used at her recitals and her honor roll ceremonies. This was the voice he used when something was real. She folded her hands on the table and looked at him. Jerome placed his phone between them. Then he opened the folder of documents Patrice had put together and set that on the table too. He took a breath, not because he needed the courage, but because he wanted to be precise. She deserved precision. "Your mother is alive," he said. The air in the kitchen changed. Camille stared at him. Her lips parted slightly and then closed. Jerome watched her face do what he had watched his own mind do in that cabin on the ship. Cycle through the automatic refusals, the "that can't be right," the "you must have made a mistake." He let her take her time. Then he told her everything. He showed her the cruise ship photograph first. He told her about the laugh he heard at the breakfast buffet, about the scar, about the 4 minutes he sat watching before he took the photo. He showed her the picture of Victor Osei. He explained Dana Mercer, the name, the dead woman's social security number, the Scottsdale driver's license issued 3.5 years ago. He showed her the dental record documents, explained what the dentist had done and when his license was pulled, and then, carefully, without softening it, he told her what the timeline meant. The planning started at least 18 months before the accident, he said. Based on when she first started seeing that dentist, Camille was very still. 18 months before, she said slowly, like she was doing math. I was in first grade. Yes. She looked at the photograph again. She looked at it for a long time. Not at Victor, not at the sundress or the hat, but at her mother's face. The searching expression that moved across Camille's features then was the same one Jerome had seen in his own bathroom mirror the morning after the cruise ship. It was the look of someone dismantling something they had believed in completely, piece by piece, checking each piece for what was real and what wasn't. She asked her first question, without looking up. She's engaged to someone else? Yes. Camille set the photograph down. She straightened it slightly, which was such a precise, controlled gesture that it made Jerome's chest hurt. She didn't speak for a while. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere outside, a car passed. The kitchen held them both in its ordinary light. The same table where Camille had done homework for 10 years, where they'd eaten birthday cake and Thanksgiving leftovers and too much takeout during finals weeks. All of it suddenly existing alongside this new information, this impossible, enormous thing that had been true the whole time. Then Camille looked up. "What are we going to do?" she said. "Not what are you going to do?" "We." Jerome told her the plan. He laid it out the same way he laid out a floor operation, in sequence, without gaps, with clear roles and clear reasoning. He told her about the engagement party, about Victor, about what he had already confirmed, and what still needed to fall into place. He told her that there was one specific moment where he needed her present, not protected, not held back, present. He told her what that moment would require of her. She listened to all of it, without interrupting. When he finished, she nodded once. "Okay," she said. "Just that. Okay." She cried later. Jerome heard it through her closed bedroom door. Not loud. The kind of crying that a person does when they are trying to keep it private. The kind that is almost worse for how quiet it is. He didn't knock. He didn't go in. He brought his back down against the hallway wall, slid down until he was sitting on the floor outside her door, and he stayed there. The apartment was dark around him. The only light came from the thin strip at the bottom of her door. He sat until that light went out, and the apartment went quiet. The flight to Phoenix was 2.5 hours. Jerome sat in a window seat with his work bag on his lap and watched Ohio disappear beneath the clouds. He had his phone face down on the tray table and a cup of black coffee going cold beside it. He did not read. He did not put in earbuds. He sat and thought through the sequence the same way he thought through a floor operation before a shift change. Every step in order. Every potential failure point already identified and addressed. He had made this particular move before, in a different context. Getting in a room with someone to read them before they knew they were being read. You learned it on the factory floor, or you didn't last long there. People told you more with their posture and their timing than they ever did with their actual words. He needed to know who Victor Ossie was in person. The file was useful. The file was not enough. Victor's office was on the 4th floor of a glass building in North Scottsdale, and the whole thing, the lobby, the elevator, the long corridor with its framed architectural renderings, looked like money that had been earned rather than inherited. There was a difference, and Jerome could feel it. The receptionist was efficient and warm. The coffee she offered was good. Victor came out to greet him himself. No assistant sent to collect him. Jerome noted that. He was a tall man, broad through the shoulders, with a firm handshake and the kind of eye contact that meant he had learned, somewhere along the way, that listening was a skill worth developing. Silver at his temples, same as in the cruise ship photograph. He wore a simple gray suit with no tie and moved through his office like a man comfortable in the space he had built. "Mr. Caldwell," he said, and gestured toward 2 chairs near the window. "Appreciate you making the trip out. Can I ask, you said you're a foreman at Delmarsh?" "12 years, Jerome said. "Made foreman 4 years ago." "Good company." Victor settled into his chair. "We did some adjacent work through Hendricks Partners a few cycles back. Good people. That's actually how your name came up," Jerome said. He kept his voice easy, unhurried. "We're looking at a facility expansion, early stages, and Hendricks mentioned your firm did strong work on the Valley Mills project." It was a real project. Jerome had looked it up. Victor had done strong work on it. They talked for 20 minutes about sites and zoning and the cost of commercial construction in the Southwest Corridor. Jerome asked careful questions and let Victor answer at length, because a man answering questions he knows the answers to will always eventually start filling extra space with things he didn't mean to say. It happened at the 18-minute mark. "I'll be honest with you," Victor said, and leaned back in his chair with an ease that Jerome recognized as genuine, not performed. "I've been a little distracted. We just got engaged. My fiancé and I." He smiled, not a showy smile, a private one, the kind a man makes when he's thinking about something that makes him happy without meaning to show it. "So my head's been somewhere else." "Congratulations," Jerome said. He kept his voice warm and level. "Thank you." Victor shook his head slightly. She's been through a lot. Lost her husband a few years back. Didn't think she'd be open to this kind of thing again, honestly. But she is. We are." He paused, then seemed to remember himself. "Sorry. You didn't fly out here to hear about my personal life." "No trouble," Jerome said. "That's good news." He meant that in a way Victor could not have understood. They shook hands at the door. Victor said he'd be in touch through Hendricks. Jerome said he looked forward to it. He walked to the elevator, rode it to the lobby, stepped out into the flat white heat of a Scottsdale afternoon, and stood on the sidewalk for a moment with his work bag over his shoulder. Victor Ossie was not a villain. Jerome had already known this from the file, but knowing it from a file and knowing it from sitting across a room from a man for 20 minutes were 2 different things. Victor was a decent man who had built real things and who was proud of something he believed in and did not know was constructed on a framework of stolen names and borrowed grief. He was, in every way that mattered, exactly what Jerome had been 4 years ago. Jerome had not felt sorry for himself in years. He was not going to start now. But he felt something adjacent to that when he thought about Victor, something quiet and certain that made him move through the rest of the day with an additional layer of purpose. He flew home that evening. The call with his attorney took 45 minutes and confirmed what Jerome had already suspected. He was still married to Adrienne Caldwell under Ohio law. A death certificate existed. It had been filed. It had been accepted. But it had been obtained through documented fraud, the suspended dentist, the falsified records, and until a court formally invalidated it, Adrienne Caldwell was legally his wife. She was not Dana Mercer. She had never been Dana Mercer, which meant that any marriage Victor entered into with a woman presenting herself as Dana Mercer would be, under the law, bigamous. Jerome wrote this down. 1 line, clean and plain. He added it to the folder. The engagement party was the following Saturday. He found Camille's essay on the kitchen counter when he got home, printed, paper-clipped, ready to mail. She had left it out where he would see it. He stood at the counter and read it. It was about resilience, about watching someone absorb the worst thing and keep moving anyway, not because they had no other choice, but because forward was the only direction they seemed to know. She had not written about grief. She had written about her father, about a man who cooked Sunday dinner and sat outside closed doors and never once made her feel like she was a burden he was carrying, even when she knew she was a weight he had chosen to hold. Jerome read it twice. He straightened the pages carefully and set them back on the counter exactly as he'd found them. He went to bed. He closed his eyes, and for the first time in 4 years, sleep came quickly, and it stayed. The Phoenix sky was the color of a bruised peach when their plane touched down on Friday evening. Jerome and Camille collected their bags without much talking. They had done most of their talking already, at the kitchen table, in the car to the airport, on the plane in low voices with the armrest between them. Camille had her mother's eyes. Jerome had always known that. Tonight, it was harder to look at than usual. The hotel was simple. Clean rooms, a small pool nobody was using. Jerome had chosen it because it was 11 minutes from Victor's neighborhood, and nothing more than that. They sat at the small table near the window and went through the folder together one last time. Jerome spread everything out in order. The photographs from the cruise ship, the accident report, the dental records with the suspension notice clipped to the back, the Dana Mercer identity documents, the insurance payout summary, the legal memo from his attorney about the marriage. Camille looked at each page. She did not rush through them. When she got to the photograph of Adrienne on the ship, laughing, leaning into Victor, hat tilted back in the sun, she held it for a moment longer than the others. Then she set it down and said, "Okay." That was all. Just okay. Jerome packed the folder back into the work bag and zipped it shut. They ordered food to the room and ate without the television on. Before Camille went to sleep, she said, "I know what I want to say. I don't need to practice it." "I know you don't," Jerome said. He meant it. Saturday arrived without ceremony. Jerome sent the message to Victor at noon, through their mutual contact at Hendricks. Brief, professional, easy to agree to. A small follow-up item from Thursday's conversation. 10 minutes at the house before the party, if Victor could spare it. He apologized for the timing. Victor replied in 20 minutes. "Of course. Come by at 4. Doors open." A decent man. Jerome thought it again. Victor's house was in a quiet neighborhood, where every yard was gravel and every driveway was freshly sealed. The houses were large, without being loud about it. Jerome parked at the curb at 4 o'clock exactly. He and Camille sat in the car for a moment. "You stay by the car until I open the door," Jerome said. "That's the only thing I need from you right now." Camille nodded. She was looking at the house. "Got it." Jerome got out, straightened his jacket, and walked up the front path. Victor opened the door before he could knock. Must have seen him from a window. He was dressed for the party already, a deep navy shirt, relaxed and ready. He smiled and offered his hand. "Mr. Caldwell, come on in." The house smelled like catered food and fresh flowers. Someone had arranged white roses in a tall vase near the entry. The kind of detail a woman arranges before guests come. Jerome noticed it. He filed it away and kept moving. Victor led him down the hallway toward the kitchen, talking about the Hendricks connection. Something about a site survey timeline. Jerome responded in the right places. He kept his voice easy. His heartbeat was steady and slow, the way it always was right before a shift change, right before he had to tell the floor what the next 8 hours were going to look like. And then they walked into the kitchen. She was standing at the island with her back to them, adjusting a tray of something. Her hair was different, shorter now, a little lighter, but the set of her shoulders was exactly the same as it had always been. Same posture. Same way of tilting her head when she was focused on a small task. Victor said, "Dana, this is Mr. Caldwell from—" She turned around. Jerome watched it happen. The color left her face the way water drains from a basin, all at once, completely, leaving nothing behind. Her hands stopped moving. The tray stayed where it was. Her eyes found his, and for one full second, the room seemed to hold its breath. Dana Mercer stopped existing in that second. Jerome could see it. The precise moment when the performance failed. When the name and the hair and the practiced laugh and the 4 years of careful construction simply stopped working, because the one person in the world who had known her before any of it was standing 8 feet away in her kitchen. He said her name. Not Dana. Adrienne. Victor looked at her, then at Jerome, then back at her. Jerome spoke plainly, no anger in it. Just the facts, delivered in the same tone he used to describe a production problem to a plant manager. Clear, sequenced, exact. My name is Jerome Caldwell. I'm Adrienne's husband. We've been married for 16 years. She faked her death in a car accident 4 years ago, and I have documentation confirming everything. The forged dental records, the false identity, the insurance payout. In this bag, whenever you're ready to look at it. Victor did not speak. Adrienne did. It came out of her in a rush, not a denial, but something she had clearly rehearsed. The way a person rehearses a thing they have been afraid of for years and hoped they would never need. The marriage was suffocating. She had been disappearing inside it long before she left. She didn't know how to get out any other way. She didn't think anyone would understand. She just needed to breathe. She just needed to… Jerome let her talk. He stood still and let every word land in the room and settle there. He did not interrupt. He did not look away. He waited until she reached the part where her voice shifted into something almost righteous. I did what I had to do. And then he raised one hand, quietly. Just one hand. She stopped. You did what you wanted to do, Jerome said. And you did it to Camille. He turned and walked to the front door. He opened it. Camille walked in. Camille walked past Jerome without looking at him. She didn't need to. She knew exactly where she was going. She stopped in the middle of the kitchen, maybe 6 feet from Adrienne, and stood there for a moment without speaking. Just looked at her, taking her in the same way Jerome had at the breakfast buffet on that ship. Methodically, without flinching, cataloging every detail. Adrienne opened her mouth. Camille shook her head once. That was enough. Adrienne closed her mouth. Jerome moved to the edge of the room and leaned against the wall near the hallway entrance. He crossed his arms and said nothing. Victor hadn't moved from his spot near the counter. The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, somewhere distant, a catering truck was pulling up the street. Camille took a breath. When she spoke, her voice was low and even. I'm not here to yell at you, she said. I'm just going to tell you some things. And you're going to stand there and hear them. Adrienne's eyes were wet. Her hands were pressed flat against the countertop behind her. The funeral was on a Thursday, Camille said. It rained. I remember because I had new shoes, and Daddy had to carry me across the parking lot so they wouldn't get muddy. He was wearing his good suit, and he carried me anyway. She paused, not for effect, just to keep herself measured. He picked your dress. The one you were buried in, the blue one with the small buttons. He stood in your closet for a long time before he chose it, because he said he wanted to pick something you would have liked. She paused again. He didn't know what you would have liked. Did he? He stood in there for a long time because he was trying to know something that wasn't knowable. Adrienne made a sound low in her throat. Her eyes were spilling over now. Camille did not soften. I was in 3rd grade when I went back to school. My teacher was Miss Patterson. She had this look she gave me. Every single day, all year, this careful, sorry look, like I was something fragile she was worried about dropping. I hated that look. I hated it every morning. But I couldn't explain that to a 3rd grader, which is what I was, so I just sat there and took it. Victor had both hands on the counter now. His head was slightly bowed. Every October, Camille continued, Dad takes the day off work. We drive to the cemetery. We sit there for a while. He doesn't cry. I've never seen him cry. But he gets very quiet in a way that's different from his regular quiet. We put flowers down. We drive home. We've done that 4 times. She stopped, looked directly at Adrienne. You were never in that ground, Camille said. There's nothing under that marker. We've been putting flowers on an empty patch of dirt for 4 years. The words sat in the kitchen like something physical. Adrienne's shoulders had collapsed inward. Her chin was trembling. She looked like she was about to say something. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, please." And Jerome could see it coming from across the room. Camille beat her to it. "I wrote my college essay about my father," she said. "About watching him work 2 jobs so we could keep the lights on, and make foremen, and show up, and still have Sunday dinner on the table every single week. I wrote about what real strength looks like up close." She let that sit. "I didn't mention you," Camille said. "Not once. Not even to say you were gone. Because you were already gone to me before I started writing. You've been gone a long time." Her voice hadn't cracked. Her hands were still at her sides. "I don't want an apology," she said. "I wouldn't trust one if you gave it. I came here because I wanted to say these things to your face. Because you deserve to hear them out loud. In a room. From me." She glanced down briefly, then back up. "I've done that. We're done." She turned and walked back toward Jerome. Jerome looked at his daughter for one quiet second. Then he reached into the work bag and pulled out the documentation folder, neatly organized, labeled, everything Patrice had compiled, and crossed the kitchen to where Victor stood. Victor looked up. His eyes were red at the edges. Jerome set the folder on the counter and placed both hands on top of it for just a moment, then slid it toward him. "Everything you need to verify is in there," Jerome said. "I have no quarrel with you. What was done to you? That's real. And you didn't deserve it either." He held Victor's gaze. "Talk to a lawyer before anything else. Before tonight. Before the guests arrive." Victor looked down at the folder. He nodded once, slowly, the way a man nods when words have temporarily left him. Jerome turned and walked toward the hallway. Camille was already at the front door. They were 2 blocks away before Jerome realized neither of them had said anything since leaving the house. The neighborhood scrolled past the windows. Gravel yards, clean driveways, white-walled houses catching the last of the afternoon sun. After a few more minutes, Camille reached over and rested her hand on his arm, just for a moment. Then she settled back into her seat and looked out the window again. Jerome kept driving. Nothing needed to be said. The Howard University enrollment packet was sitting in the center of the kitchen table, next to Jerome's coffee cup and a highlighter he hadn't picked up yet. He didn't need to highlight anything. He'd already read it 3 times. He just liked looking at it. Camille Renee Caldwell. Fall enrollment. Partial merit scholarship. The scholarship covered 60%. Jerome's savings, 4 years of double shifts, foreman wages, and a social life that barely existed, covered the rest with enough left to breathe. He picked up his coffee and leaned back in his chair. 4 months had passed since Scottsdale. The Ohio attorney, a precise woman named Hendricks, who wore reading glasses on a chain and did not waste words, filed the fraud declaration the week after they returned. The death certificate, the one Jerome had signed, the one that sat in a county filing cabinet in Franklin County for 4 years, was formally invalidated by the court 2 months later. Adrienne Caldwell had not died in any river. The record was corrected. The insurance company moved faster than Jerome expected. They didn't negotiate. They never did. A $200,000 payout, plus 4 years of accrued interest, plus penalties. The civil judgment came down on a Tuesday, and Hendricks called Jerome at work to tell him. He stepped off the factory floor, took the call in the hallway, said thank you, and went back to work. He didn't celebrate. Celebrating felt strange for something that was simply a correction. The money had been taken from him. The court said so. That was enough. Victor canceled the engagement the same evening Jerome and Camille drove away from his house. Jerome learned this not from Victor, but from Hendricks, who had begun coordinating with Victor's legal team within days of the confrontation. Victor cooperated with investigators completely. He handed over 3 years of communications, financial records, anything they asked for. A man who had built a real estate career on the foundation of his own credibility was not going to protect a woman who had borrowed his name and his grief support group and his trust like props in a performance. His civil fraud suit against Adrian was filed 6 weeks after Scottsdale. It was resolved 4 months later. He won. Jerome and Victor never became close. That wasn't this kind of story. But they exchanged, once, a brief message through their attorneys, something that amounted, on both sides, to, "I see you. Neither of us deserved this." Jerome read it once and filed it away. That was enough, too. Darnell called twice. The first call, Jerome let go to voicemail. He listened to the message once. Darnell's voice was thick and slow, the voice of a man who had been rehearsing something painful. He said he was sorry. He said he hoped Camille would understand someday. He said he missed them both. Jerome set his phone down and went to ask Camille directly, because that was always how they did things. She was sitting at her desk with her laptop open, a college orientation checklist on the screen. She thought about it for a moment. Then she said, "I don't want a relationship with him. Not now. Not later. He held my hand at that grave, Dad." That was all she needed to say. The second time Darnell called, Jerome answered. He stood in the kitchen, near the window where the afternoon light came in and made the countertops look warm, and he said what needed to be said. "Camille has made her decision. I'm going to respect that. I won't be speaking to you again." Darnell started to say something. Jerome waited politely for a pause, then said goodbye, and hung up. He never spoke to him again. He meant that completely. What happened to Adrian in those 4 months was not dramatic. It was something quieter and more thorough than drama. Dana Mercer ceased to exist. The identity was flagged, documented, and legally dissolved during the fraud proceedings. Her accounts were frozen while the civil judgments worked through the courts. 2 of Victor's colleagues severed business relationships with contacts connected to her professional network. Not out of cruelty, but out of the simple, efficient way that reputations travel in small industries. She was not difficult to avoid once people understood what she was. At chapter's end, she was living in a 1-bedroom rental in Phoenix, on money borrowed from a sister who answered her calls with obvious reluctance. Legally, formally, she was still Adrian Caldwell, Jerome's wife, on paper, until the courts finished what they started. The name she had tried to bury had followed her home. She had built something very carefully over 4 years, and it had turned out to be built on ground she didn't own. Jerome drove Camille to Howard in August. They carried boxes up 2 flights of stairs in the Washington heat, both of them sweating through their shirts. Her roommate hadn't arrived yet, so the room was theirs for a while. Half-assembled furniture, a poster not yet taped to the wall, a small fan running in the corner. Jerome set a box down and looked around the room. Clean walls, a window, a desk where his daughter would sit and become whoever she was already becoming. Camille appeared in the doorway, a duffel bag over one shoulder, her hair pulled back. She had her mother's eyes and her father's stillness. "You doing okay, Dad?" He looked at her. This girl he had raised alone. This girl who had stood in a stranger's kitchen and said the truest things in the quietest voice. "Yeah," he said. "I really am." He hugged her in the hallway outside her door. Then he rode the elevator down to the lobby, walked to the car, and pointed himself north toward Columbus. He stopped at a barber shop on the way out of the city, the kind with 2 chairs and a radio playing low, and a man who asked no questions and did good work. Jerome sat in the chair and watched 4 years of neglect fall away in clean, deliberate lines. He tipped well. He always did. He ate dinner that evening at a restaurant in Columbus. Not a drive-through, not a bar stool, but a real table by the window with cloth napkins and a menu he actually read. He ordered the salmon. He opened his book, the worn paperback he'd been carrying for 6 weeks on the cruise ship, the one he had finally, somewhere in these last 4 months, managed to finish. He'd started a new one. He read 3 chapters without looking up. When the check came, he tipped 25% and returned the waiter's nod with a small one of his own. He walked out into the late summer evening. The air was still warm, but the light had gone soft and gold, the way it does in August, when the season is just beginning to think about changing. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment and felt something he hadn't expected. Light. Not happy, exactly. Not yet. But light. The specific, unmistakable feeling of a man who has set down something he didn't know he was carrying. He stood there for a moment in it. Then he walked to his car. It turned out grief, like most things Adrian had given him, was something he didn't actually need. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.